Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the AI Futures podcast series for the India AI Summit, where we're bringing you some of the world's best thinkers, doers, leaders from across various sectors who are working in the field of AI. And today I'm delighted to have with us Vilas Dhar. Vilas is the president of the Patrick McGovern Foundation. He was a member of the UN High Level Advisory Committee on AI. And most importantly, if I may, he's a fellow Harvard Kennedy School alum. And so it's my pleasure to have you here with us, Vilas. Welcome.
Anirudh, what a delight and a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our chat.
Yes. And as we were just discussing, it's crazy that we've not met before, even though we're doing many, I think, things that intersect and align. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Let me first start off with a fairly simple question. How has it been being at the summit?
I mean, it has been a really incredible experience, Anirudh, for several reasons. One, as somebody who's been working in AI for 25 years, I have to acknowledge I've never felt so much like a rock star as to come to India and be with lakhs of people who are so interested and engaged. I think I've taken more selfies in 3 days than I have in my entire life. But maybe slightly less flippant, it's been a really important moment, a moment where we go from a global conversation about AI that for too long has just been scientists, companies, and governments.
Yes.
And now is, as I've always advocated for, bringing in real people who are trying to understand how to incorporate this in their life. And if nothing else, the first global AI summit in the global south truly is participatory and representative. And I think that's a fantastic achievement.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think the fact that, I was talking to someone earlier about this also. I think that finally the rubber has hit the road for a lot of the, AI thinkers, AI scientists, AI companies that are building, the new models of our world, for them to see actually the masses of people that have attended the summit to know that this is their end customer, these are their consumers. And I hope that that conversation has been two-way.
Exactly.
As much as the people have listened to them on panels, I hope that they have listened to the end consumers at the end of the day. You've had a long personal journey that has brought you here. Let's maybe spend a few minutes on that. Briefly walk us through your personal journey and how have you ended up now where you are?
Well, you're very kind to ask, Anirudh. I'll tell you my history in this space is almost a collection of both places and times. My parents went to the United States from India in the late 1970s. I grew up there.
What part of India were they from?
They were from Bangalore.
From Bangalore.
And they moved to a very small town in the United States that really was in the middle of fields of corn and soybeans. And in some ways, not much else. In Illinois, rural Illinois, about 2 hours south of Chicago. But I'll tell you, I mean, we were not a rich family. We were actually quite a poor family. But when we could, my parents' goal was really to bring us to India as often as possible.
Yeah.
And so I'd come and we'd go to a small village just outside of Bangalore, and still a place where telephones were coming in. Not everybody had one. There was still no running water in this village. Power was unreliable. But I saw what happened when a community came together to solve problems by themselves. And it was an incredibly empowering experience. And then when I went back to the US, I was very lucky to live very close to a national center for supercomputing.
Oh, wow.
So when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was running through Cray supercomputers. I learned to code very early in my life. I saw the incredible promise of what technology and even what we thought of as AI could be. And that's defined my whole life. On one side, an optimism about all the things we could build if we did it for the right reasons. And maybe on the other, a little bit of impatience and frustration that we know this is possible and we don't quite do enough. Shaped my entire life. Very briefly, I became a computer scientist and a bioengineer. I started my own company. I did that for a while. I then ended up becoming a human rights lawyer, took a totally different turn. But it shows the two sides of my personality, right? I wanted to understand systems and power. And since then, my life has been a combination of building technology for good and supporting governments and civil society to know how to use it well. As you mentioned, I went to the Harvard Kennedy School. I got to spend some time really in both reflection and in active participation. And I was given an incredible opportunity to lead the first new institution of the 21st century that combined philanthropy, the idea that we had some capital to invest and give away, but with a technical native awareness of what AI would mean for humanity. And that's what we've done. I now lead the world's largest institution, primarily focused on how we build AI for good. We've donated and invested over $500 million, but maybe much more importantly, we've helped to shape the public narrative about what responsible AI should be, who should participate, who should benefit, and how we build it in a way that makes our society better.
So give us, I want to spend a couple of minutes on the work you're doing with the McGovern Foundation. For those who are not familiar, give us a couple of examples of projects that you might have
Sure.
either funded or promoted.
Yeah,
through your work.
absolutely. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. It's called Climate Trace. And Climate Trace is the world's largest and first integrated platform that collects issues about carbon emissions, one of the primary drivers of climate change, and makes it available. Now, I'll spare you all of the technical details, but this was the work of building governance mechanisms around data sharing, building the technological frameworks, building the predictive analytics, building the entire AI stack really around a fundamental question. How do we ensure that everybody's equipped to understand their impacts on climate change? It's now used by thousands of organizations around, nonprofits that use it for climate advocacy using AI to model and predict climate effects. The private sector that's trying to decarbonize their supply chain, who now can ask foundational questions about where their goods come from and how they might make net economic zero changes. That is no more cost, but fundamentally transform the carbon profile that they operate in. And it's used by large investment firms to change how they might invest trillions of dollars over the next decade. This is AI for good. It's not about the AI stack itself. It's how it's used to empower us to make better decisions about the future we're creating.
Excellent. I'm glad that you shared that example, because I think one of the key debates that's been going on in India now for the last maybe at least 2 years now almost is this idea that should we go for AI innovation? Should we prioritize AI innovation? Especially at the frontier level? Or should we focus on AI adoption and diffusion? Right? It's a debate where I think in the summit and other places, you'll generally see India leaning more towards the adoption and diffusion piece. But with some amount of push now on the AI innovation front through, new R&D, budget allocations, etc., to institutions in India. Where do you stand on this dual approach that countries, I mean, it's not an India-specific question either. Applies to pretty much any country today. Like, how do you think about that divide?
We have advised 80 plus governments around the world on this very question, Anirudh. And here's where the answer has to land. On one side, I want to stop any messaging that says India cannot be a primary participant in building frontier AI. And unfortunately, we've heard some of the tech CEOs come here and say almost exactly that. But I know the capacity of this country. I know what's possible. There may be some barriers and obstacles that slow us down. But at the same time, we could be frontier model builders. And in fact, this week, we've seen what that looks like with the launch of Servam. Servam AI, I'm sure your viewers know, is the first kind of open stack, open source AI model built here in India that does something really special. At a much smaller size, a much lower power consumption, at only about 1 billion parameters, it performs as well as some of the most powerful frontier models that are created in the West. Because constraints lead to innovation. So let's say that there is a possibility there, but let me also talk about the real opportunity in the moment, which is, we use this term AI diffusion. I don't love the term. It feels very passive. Maybe with targeted and direct investments in policy, like we're seeing now here in India, we could actually build such powerful parts of the overall AI stack that we're actually talking about interdependence rather than overdependence. That is that India is creating the public goods around application layers, around new and more power efficient mechanisms of deploying AI at scale, ones that actually allow for participatory mechanisms, that rather than being consumers of a global AI stack, India is a participant in building a significant part of it. I think this is an incredible opportunity. And I've met organizations and firms across the country this week that are really investing in this. What I can say from an international perspective is we're ready for it and cheering for India in this work. At the UN high-level advisory body panel, one of the conversations we always had was, and this was years ago before we were really into the thick of it, how do we ensure that every country participates at the level of competency where they uniquely provide a voice and a wisdom? This is what we're seeing come to fruition here in India.
So I love this idea that I think, Vilas, you've raised of the interdependence, right? I think, and every country finding its own niche in this global AI ecosystem, but harder said than done. Really harder said than done, because I've seen now, whether it's countries in Asia, Africa, literally any country other than the US or China. And, I think I was mentioning my book. In my book, I spoke about this not in the context of AI, but tech generally, that you have these two tech superpowers in our world today, the US and China. They are competing on every piece of the tech stack. AI, bio, you name it, right? Cyber. You can take any frontier emerging technology and you'll find the two of them will be competing at it, and they have the resources to do it. But for every other country, they have to find their, as you were saying, I think, niche, right? For lack of resources, which can, of course, drive innovation. So my question for you is actually to follow up on that point is, as you have seen countries around the world, including India, here, of course, we are seeing this churn through this intellectual churn at this summit. where I think a lot of ideas are brimming and coming up, which will hopefully refine India's strategy further. But what about the rest of the world?
Yeah.
What countries have you seen where this exercise of finding that niche, of finding ways of creating interdependence, are working well?
Yeah. Well, what a great question. A very thoughtful one. I want to give you a macro answer and then a micro answer. The macro answer is, first, let's acknowledge that the world is reshaping so dynamically that I have a full expectation that India operates as a great power within the next decade. That I'm not sure that the answer will be that India has to give up on competing against the whole stack. In fact, I think the exact opposite is true. Now, it may take a little bit of time to get there.
Correct.
But in the meantime, what we're seeing is this regional diversification of lived experience. And I'll give you some examples. We're seeing this work that's happening in a place like Senegal that really looks at the restructuring of local agricultural practices. They have a significant amount of investment into restructuring how they buy seeds, about how they help farmers understand water cycles, about how they make sure they harvest well. The good thing about it, Anirudh, though, is what they're doing isn't in isolation. They're drawing from lessons that have come from around the world, from work that's happening in Trinidad around sugarcane farming, where we have a center of excellence for AI for agriculture. They're drawing from places like here in India, and of course, from the agricultural frameworks in the US. But what happens when they actually crack the problem, right? When they're able to build not just whatever the technological solution is, but the full behavioral transformation? Yeah. How do they package it up and export it in a way that teaches all the rest of us what it is that they have learned? This is the work that needs to happen. And one of the ways that we've thought about an intervention there is we built, again, at the United Nations level, a global network of exchange centers of excellence that can exchange practice and code that can actually provide both technological and behavioral framing. Okay. At the micro level, let me give you a little bit of a different answer. And this brings us back to kind of why we're here at the summit. We can talk about what the topics might be. We can talk about what competition looks like internationally, but we also have to come back to where is that actually being originated? I have a little vignette for you. Last year at the Paris AI Summit, I had the chance to launch a new $2.5 billion initiative on building AI capacity in the global south. But I will tell you, I've been in India many times in the intervening year, and I've had a chance to find my own source of pride. And for me, the people I'm proud of are these young students in these universities and colleges across the country. I've had a chance to visit places like MICA in Ahmedabad, or PSG in Coimbatore, Amrita University in Kerala. And when I go to these places, of course, there's a lecture and there's a discussion, but then I get to spend time with students who are figuring out what role they want to play in shaping our society enabled by AI. The number of ideas I get, and not ideas that I often hear maybe in other places, which are, oh, here's a marketing solution that uses AI to help advertising, or here's an AI solution that's going to make me $100 million. It's often an AI solution that says, my family faces this problem. Correct. And I've been thinking about how to build a device, an algorithm, or an application that helps them solve it.
Yeah.
That to me is a source of hope for how we fix this question of what competitiveness looks like. Because if we could have a world where people know that they have the agency and power to build AI solutions that solve their family's problems, that gives me more hope and confidence about an AI-enabled world than anything I've seen come out of Silicon Valley.
No, that's great. That's great, Vilas. I usually ask a question on this to people who work across multiple countries in AI.
Yeah.
That are you worried that too much of our agenda setting on what we're going to use AI for is being set in Silicon Valley and then let's say maybe China? And if it is, how do you fix that? But in a way, what you are saying is don't even worry about that so much. Let the Silicon Valley companies and their equivalents elsewhere in the world keep doing what they're doing, but let the other parts of the world actually then take the lead in setting the agenda closer to whatever problems they are facing.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say don't worry about it. I worry about it.
I said
it's often my 4 a.m. worry is that we have over-depended on a very tight concentration of AI agenda setting. But let's say it a little bit differently, maybe. It's not just the agenda, it's also the framework of decision-making and governance. So many frameworks have been created about how we govern AI, and some of them are coming out of the tech companies and some out of governments. But governance is muscle memory. We have to actually learn the practices of governance, and that'll come in the collaboration of data sharing and algorithmic design and other things that we'll do. We have to do it together.
This idea that today countries are competing, and then there's, of course, companies that are competing, from the sector that you also represent, which is like civil society as a voice, is your sense that the voices like yours can create a different nature for this competition? Because right now it seems like it's a competition, much like, I try and draw parallels in history to provoke, right? Yeah. And I feel like at some point it feels like there's this neo-colonialism with AI.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
capture as many markets as we can. Let's capture as many use cases as we can, because if we don't, the other rival will. How do you view this nature of competition possibly changing?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem to me that it's very healthy for the world necessarily. Healthy competition, very good.
Yeah.
But maybe there's some kind of guardrails or frames that you want to draw where it's healthy competition for good for the world and not just competition for the sake of it.
Well, you're absolutely right to say this competition dynamic is taking us away from what matters. When people talk about the AI race, look, I still have a childlike curiosity about the world. I was with my dear friend Shekhar Kapoor earlier this week, and he said, why do we ever grow up? Children ask all the right questions. So I still ask the right questions. When you talk about a race, I've got to ask, can anybody elaborate for me what we're racing towards?
Correct.
We don't really know, right? And so it's almost this idea of provoking an emotional response and saying we have to go faster and faster, but we don't know towards what. So instead of talking about competition as the primary dynamic, why don't we talk about leadership? Instead of competing in an AI race, why don't we ask, what is our vision of what this world should look like? Who elaborates that vision? Because I'll tell you, Anirudh, the great challenge we have right now is we have a small set of visions that we've heard from even in this summit, from the titans of the tech companies, right?
Yeah.
They are often about either how do we make the most profitable outcome,
Yeah.
or let's scare you a little bit with existential fears. And we heard both of those this week. My voice, the voice of civil society and the people that we represent and that we share the stage with, very rarely starts with either of those things. It doesn't start with profit or fear. It doesn't start with hype or with horror. It starts with meaningful and pragmatic hope. What does it look like to build a society that has greater economic participation, educational access, that actually builds AI tools that let people live better lives? These aren't tropes. They're not passing slogans. They have to be turned into practical matters.
Absolutely.
And that narrative exists. It absolutely exists because I know it, because I see it with hundreds of thousands of people around the world that are actively building. Maybe the thing we should recognize and do is not say, where is that conversation, but rather say, it exists. How do we bring it into the limelight? And how do we maybe properly bound the amount of power and resonance we give to the tech CEOs to shape what billions of people around the world think about the story?
Yeah, no, I think too much of that narrative gets shaped, as you, I think, very rightly saying, too narrowly. Yeah. And the other voices then get drowned. And I think it's very important that, the kind of work you're doing through your foundation and otherwise, I think individually as well, that more and more of that gets highlighted into the mainstream. And, conversation I was having with Jeetu earlier, one of the things that we really ended that conversation with was, amongst all this hype, let me give you a couple of anecdotes from the last few days, right? So much hype around tech and AI, of course, at an AI summit. But I'll tell you, over the last 4 days, my favorite moment, other than, of course, conversations I'm having, has been last night at the Swiss embassy. Swiss president hosted a dinner, and they had classical music with an Indian and a European performer. And the evening was magical. And I was telling the musicians later that I don't think anything over the last 4 days has given me as much joy and peace as the last half an hour with you. And I was telling him, I went to a Quaker college in Philadelphia, and I was telling them that, at Quaker colleges, you start every meeting and end every meeting with a minute of silence to ground you, to center you. And I was telling them that your music has done that for me tonight.
Beautiful.
Right? And I think that I mentioned because I think that too often tech, Silicon Valley, forgets that there's a whole world of wisdom out there, from the music to the art to the common person, right? Solving their specific problem, as you were saying, for their family. That sometimes if that doesn't get incorporated, we are living in our own real ivory tower bubbles. So I'm glad you pointed that. And the other thing I was talking to Jeetu was that how important values are. In all of this, as tech is shaping our world, it's very important that our values remain clear. And then we use that to shape the kind of tech for good that you were talking about, or the kind of AI for good. But this has been great. Vilas, any last thoughts?
Well, maybe just a quick closing comment. I think as an accomplished podcaster, maybe you shouldn't hold on to the minute of silence lesson too tightly. I'm not sure the viewers would love it, but think about what kind of conversations we could have if we started from values and principles first, not just what tech will do. Let me just say one last thing to you, and I've so appreciated this time together. I appreciate this warm welcome in India, but I leave Delhi more hopeful than I arrived. And I think that's a really powerful testament to what this meeting has been. I'm not so much hopeful about what the frontier models will do, and I'm not a techno-optimist that says they'll fix everything. But I'm hopeful because I've seen across this week people who are stepping forward to build solutions, government ministers who are willing to build policy, technology companies here in India that are willing to build products that make the market better and more robust, and people like you that want to bring it to the world and really have these deep conversations. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much, Vilas. And we end every podcast with 2 quick questions. Books that you would recommend our viewers, listeners read.
Yeah.
And second is a couple of podcast guest recommendations.
Oh, fantastic. Well, on the book side, I'll give you the answer I always give, which is a book called Siddhartha. It's actually a German philosopher who wrote a book in the mid-19th century about our Siddhartha.
About Buddha.
But it is a beautiful book that talks about a personal journey of realization and longing and agency. I can't think of anything more powerful as we think about technology than starting within ourselves. And on podcasts, I hear there are some podcasts I should be listening to that you host that are pretty amazing. Everybody has told me about them. But also, I think staying at the forefront of things with folks like Ezra Klein, people in the United States, but also I'm hopeful seeing a growing international set of podcasts from places like Kazakhstan and Senegal and Chad and Saudi Arabia and here in India that give us the global context. I'm always happy to share. I share a lot on LinkedIn if people want to follow me. I'm happy to share sources as we go.
No, perfect. Thanks so much for those recommendations. I'm going to pick up the book on Siddhartha, and I know Ezra's book is something Abundance, right? Which I'm scheduled to read soon.
Very good.
So thank you for those recommendations and lovely having you.
What a delight. Thank you.